is going down in the Premier League? It's an interesting debate. Guys, welcome back to another video on the channel. Yesterday we were speaking about the top two of the Championship, and today we're here to talk about the bottom three of the Premier League. Now, the other day on the community tab, I put a poll out for you guys to vote on, asking you who you think is the most likely to stay up out of Burnley, Watford, Newcastle and Norwich, and 65% of you have gone ahead and voted for Newcastle. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've had a bit of a dive into the numbers and what each team is going to have to do from now until the end of the season if they want to go ahead and beat the draw. If you do go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like and do stick around and subscribe for some regular football content. But without any further ado, let's hop into this one. So the benchmark for survival that we're going to be using for today's video is 35 points. I've gone ahead and worked out the average points total needed for survival in the Premier League over the past 10 seasons, and that works out to be 35 points. Now obviously different seasons we can have a high or low tide. Last season, for example, a team only needed 29 points to go ahead and survive, the lowest number of the last decade. And in contrast to this, in 2010/11 you needed 40 points to go ahead and survive. So there are some fluctuations around this point, but generally speaking it's around about that 35 point tally to go ahead and secure your place in the Premier League for another season. Right now it's looking like it might be a little bit of a low tide with the amount of points that each of the sides in the bottom three have, but we could see an uptrend of that in the second half of the season. What I've gone ahead and worked out is what each team will need to average in terms of points per game between now and the end of the season if they want to go ahead and reach that 35 point tally, and it works out quite interestingly and gives us an idea of who has the most realistic survival hopes. So we'll start out with Burnley, as they're currently at the foot of the table. Now Burnley are the interesting one in the relegation zone at the moment because they're like a little bit of a wild card due to having several games in hand on the teams above them. They have significantly the best defensive record of the sides in the bottom three, having only conceded 27 goals so far this season. However, their major problems have come in the final third. Obviously, January didn't get off to a great start when they lost Chris Wood, but all their hopes are now going to be pinned on Weghorst doing something for them in the second half of the season. Burnley are one of only 3 Premier League sides who have averaged less than a goal per game so far this season, so his importance of actually hitting the ground running is absolutely vital for them. Burnley have 20 games left to play this season, and if they want to hit the 35 point mark, they will need to average 1.15 points per game from now on to go ahead and reach that point tally. Interestingly enough, last season Burnley only averaged 1.03 points per game, so not only are they going to have to improve on their points per game from the first half of this season, but they're also going to have to quite significantly outperform the points they were picking up from last season. Is it going to be a job too much? Well, we'll see at the end of the season whether this January window has gone ahead and tilted the odds in Burnley's favour. My gut feeling right now is that Burnley will be relegated. Next up then, let's talk about Watford. Obviously in the Championship last season, so viewers on the channel will know plenty about Watford. They've recently gone ahead and appointed Roy Hodgson. Everything seems a bit crazy from the outside looking in, from an outsider's perspective on Watford, but I have to say I do think there is some sense grounded in bringing in a manager like Roy Hodgson for the situation that they currently find themselves in. Now, Watford's problems have largely been the opposite of Burnley's, really. They can't defend for the life of them. They're averaging 2 goals conceded per game, and the appointment of Roy Hodgson does give them a glimmer of hope that things might improve in this area. Throughout his time with Crystal Palace, Palace conceded on average 1.5 goals per game, and if Hodgson's able to get this Watford defence closer to those sort of numbers, it gives them a fighting chance of improving their current point tally. With 18 games left for Watford, they will need to average 1.16 points per game from now on in order to reach that 35 point mark. So Watford have to be better from this point on than Burnley do. They need to accrue more points per game due to them having already played more matches. So far this season, Watford have picked up just 0.7 points per game, which really goes to show the magnitude and the scale of the job that Roy Hodgson has on his hands here. Once again, my gut feeling for Watford is that they will be relegated. Next up then to Newcastle. They are probably one of the most interesting sides, not just in the relegation picture at the moment, but in the grand schemes of the Premier League. With them flexing their financial muscles in January, I think that most people are expecting at least somewhat of an upward trend in momentum for Newcastle between now and the end of the season. From an outsider's perspective, and I have caught a few Newcastle matches since Eddie Howe has come in, I do think that stylistically they have improved since Bruce, but there is still a long way to go, and the success of their January window will ultimately decide their fate for the rest of the season. From now on, Newcastle will need to pick up 1.17 points per game to go ahead and reach that 35-point mark, so they will need to pick up more points per game than both Watford and Burnley. However, things have improved in terms of picking up points since Eddie Howe has come in. Newcastle have been averaging 1 point per game since Eddie Howe's appointment, and theoretically, with them having a better squad coming out of January, you'd imagine they'd be able to make up that 0.17 difference between now and the end of the season. So my feeling is, with the additions they've made, the way they've already improved under Howe, I think Newcastle may just survive this season. Coming up next then to Norwich. Norwich obviously another club who everyone on the channel will know all about, with them having been in the Championship recently. Now, Norwich have the worrying combination of having the least amount of goals scored in the Premier League whilst having conceded the most Premier League goals this season. However, saying that, they are currently outside of the bottom three. Dean Smith has no doubt had an impact on this Norwich side so far this season, and in the same number of matches that Eddie Howe's been in charge of Newcastle, Dean Smith at Norwich has also been averaging 1 point per game with the Canaries, which is a significant improvement from where he picked them up from. To go ahead and reach the 35-point mark though, Norwich will need to average 1.18 points per game, which is a higher tally than each of the clubs below them. This of course due to Norwich playing more matches so far. And Norwich's potential lack of transfer business throughout January could harm them in this area. There was the feeling, at least a month ago, that Norwich were sort of dead and buried really, but with Dean Smith managing to claw together a couple of wins for them, suddenly it seems back on, albeit there weren't maybe those needed additions coming in January, and for that reason I think that Norwich may just slip back in to the bottom three, but I do think they'll be much more competitive under Dean Smith. Everton are an interesting one. They've of course recently gone ahead and appointed Frank Lampard, done some interesting business throughout January as well, and are a little bit of an outlier in this year's relegation battle, as I don't think anyone particularly expected them to be in and around this part of the table. Now, on the face surface of things looking alright for Everton in terms of avoiding the drop. Now, don't get me wrong, towards the end on the Rafa Benitez, their form was absolutely abysmal, and they were only heading in one way, and that was down the table. To go ahead and reach the 35-point mark, Everton will only need to average 0.84 points per game from now on. Under Rafa Benitez, they were even averaging 1 point per game, so theoretically under Benitez they probably would have still survived. However, Everton's expectations are much higher than just scraping survival, aren't they? And that's, now the job of Frank Lampard. So gut feeling is that Everton will be alright, and I think they will have a little bit of a bump up in their form with the arrival of Frank Lampard and some of the additions they've made. Leeds United currently sits 7 points above the relegation zone. Last season, Bielsa's side finished 9th in the Premier League, and it has been a little bit of a fall off from that this time around. Few sort of constraints to take into consideration with Leeds at the moment, obviously with the accumulation of injuries and things like that, a fairly thin squad where some rookies have had to step up in certain games. It's all accumulated to see them slide down the table, but to go ahead and reach that 35-point mark, Leeds will only need to pick up 0.76 points per game from now on, which you'd imagine would be fairly easily achievable for a side like Leeds. So for me, also similar to Everton, I think they'll be alright. And then the last team we'll touch on for today's video is Brentford, obviously in the Championship last season. Now, they are 14th in the table. They have accumulated the most points of any of the sides that we've talked about in today's video so far. They have played more matches than any of the sides below them though, so there is still that to take into consideration, but I do still think Brentford are in a pretty healthy position even with them losing their last 4 matches. So Brentford have 15 games left and they need 12 more points to go ahead and reach that 35-point benchmark. To go ahead and do that, they'll need to average 0.8 points per game from now until the end of the season. So far they're averaging over that. They've averaged a point per game so far this season, so unless this trend of losing matches continues for Brentford, you'd imagine they pick things up and they are looking in decent shape to go ahead and beat the drop, which is I think what I predicted at the start of the season. I do think I had Brentford to survive in my prediction. But that's the current picture in the bottom 3. I'll be very interested to get your guys' takes on this one in the comments down below. For me personally, and the way that I'm seeing the relegation battle, I think my 3 picks at this point to go down would probably be Burnley, Watford and Norwich. I do think that with Newcastle's business, we've already seen them improve in terms of points per game under Eddie Howe so far. I think they'll just trend upwards enough to go ahead and displace Norwich, and they'll fall into that last relegation spot. But it's going to be an interesting one. I think the bottom of the Premier League this season has been more interesting than the top of the Premier League, with Man City running away with things. But that's what I personally think. I want to get your guys' thoughts on this one in the comments down below. If you'd like to see any other Premier League videos, particularly with me focusing on the sort of bottom half, do leave a like on today's one and do stick around and subscribe for some regular footballing content. Apart from that though guys, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you all in the next one.